Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so we got a lot of ground to cover, don't we? I'm going to try to focus on things that you haven't heard about yet or are less likely to have heard about yet. So I'm going to give you the most updated information I have right now. And it's tricky because probably by the time I post this, there might be more, and we'll see. So in the shooting of Charlie Kirk, they have arrested a couple people so far that have not turned out to be the person. So as of right now, they have nobody. Wall Street Journal also reported that Trump apparently hinted that there's big progress in this case, but he cited no progress at all. And I can't even find that article anymore from Wall Street Journal. So I don't know what Wall Street Journal is doing. They're posting stories, they're retracting them, and they seem to be trafficking in misinformation at this moment. But the headline here right now for me is that Steven Crowder pushed a story to the Wall Street Journal about the ATF supposedly saying that they found bullets with carvings on them that indicated that there was some kind of pro-trans, anti-fascist ideology in the killer. This was supposedly a gun that was found in the woods nearby the shooting, wrapped in a towel, they said. And they said there was one casing. And they said they found a series of arrows on the bullets that indicated that this was some kind of pro-trans ideology. So the Wall Street Journal reported on this, pretty much just repeating that claim that the bullets had those engravings on them, and that it was that according to the ATF, it was transgender ideology. That's what they said, that there was transgender ideology on the bullets. But they have now backed off that and said that an early bulletin said there were engravings found on the bullet that are likely to tie it to transgender ideology. And now experts, including experts that work at the ATF and have worked at the ATF, have come out to say that there needs to be caution exercised because these bulletins do not necessarily mean that something's true. It's essentially the earliest information that's coming out that is circulating so that other people, other police offices can reference that information. But a lot of times it turns out to not be true. And a lot of people are posting that many bullets have different engravings on them that could be mistaken to be some kind of transgender symbol like arrows. The arrows are specifically what were referenced in these reports as potentially being linked to transgender ideology, so to speak. But there are lots of bullets that have engravings with arrows on them. Not to mention the fact that there are no symbols that I know of, or that anybody else seems to know of, relating to quote-unquote transgender ideology having to do with arrows. There's like anti-fascist symbols that have to do with arrows, but again, nothing has been produced. We don't know what these symbols look like. And it seems like this could just be standard imprints on the bullets. So that information seems to be what has caused the Wall Street Journal to back off of that story a little bit. They have not unpublished it as of now. But the most interesting thing about this is that this story comes from Steven Crowder. And Steven Crowder somehow leaked this bulletin to the Wall Street Journal. So this bulletin that they were reporting on was not something that was supposed to be out there because it might not be true. But Steven Crowder leaked it to the press, to the Wall Street Journal specifically, because he wanted to push the narrative that a transgender person did this. So as of right now, there's no evidence of that. And the FBI, supposedly some special agent in charge of the Salt Lake office, came out and said that they found what they believe to be the weapon, which is this rifle in the woods. But later in the press conference that they held with Kash Patel and the governor of Utah, they did not make any mention of this weapon. And they talked about this video footage of this guy who goes and runs off the roof, jumps down, and then they have some video footage of him running through some neighborhoods. So it seems like they don't have any evidence that he ran through this wooded area that they supposedly found this gun in. So they're backing off that claim. They arrested 2 people so far that have been released, and they don't seem to have any idea where this person is. So the main theme of all of this right now is incompetence, utter incompetence. And at this press conference with the Utah governor, Kash Patel didn't even say anything. The Utah governor presented all of the information to the public, and there's even a part where he says something about how bots are getting involved in this conversation and spreading a lot of disinformation because they want violence. And the Utah governor says that we have foreign enemies that want there to be violence in America and encourages people to ignore those bots. It's odd to me that the governor of Utah is the one saying that message to the American people when the FBI director is right there. That's exactly the kind of thing that the FBI director is supposed to be saying to the people. And then Kash Patel just says nothing and walks off screen. That's weird. That's weird. The dude doesn't even want to get in front of a camera right now. And that's not to mention the fact that this story published in the Wall Street Journal was sourced from Steven Crowder and seems to have been completely overblown. So not only Steven Crowder, but also the Wall Street Journal was just chomping at the bit to publish this, and it is being repeated verbatim all over the press. So many people are just completely uncritically reporting that, not with the language that an early bulletin is where this information came from. So this was a completely successful misinformation hit when it comes to Steven Crowder. He got some absolute bullshit that he shouldn't have even had his hands on in the first place out to many people, and it's very likely that that information could already get some people killed, even if they don't run with it further than they already have. So I don't know who this killer is. Nobody knows who it is. They have some images of him now, and it appears to be a male. He's wearing some, typical Charlie Kirk fan type of attire. There's nothing that really stands out much about what he's wearing, but they don't seem to have any idea how to find this guy. And Kash Patel doesn't seem to be coming up with anything. I remember early this morning, meaning the morning of the 11th, the authorities in Utah came out to say that they are currently trying to find the person without releasing the images of him because they want to try to figure out who it is on their own if they can. But if they don't have any luck with that, that's when they will turn it over to the public and offer a reward and open it up for tips. So as of now, they've done that. That was about 6 a.m. PT Pacific time that the Utah authorities were saying that, and then a few hours later they released the photo of the guy. So it doesn't seem to me that Kash Patel and the office of the FBI is offering anything at all to this investigation. These are some podcasters that were put in place by Donald Trump because these podcasters signaled loyalty to Donald Trump, and they have no fucking idea what they're doing. And given all of that, given all the fact that they have, thrown all of these different things out there, including arresting suspects, and come up with nothing, Donald Trump has already come out and blamed the left for this, said that the left is responsible for this, Democrats are responsible for this, and threatened to go after these different entities, not only anybody who's involved in this, but also organizations and entities essentially that they can blame for spreading this type of rhetoric. So the Donald Trump narrative and the MAGA world narrative is that the left caused this, and if they can get away with it, the left did this so that they can ramp up violence and cracking down on anybody that they deem to be left. So I believe that Donald Trump saying this was mostly to appease his base. This is what his base wanted to hear him say. He also said, when asked by a reporter, the reporter said, Charlie Kirk was an advocate of nonviolence. How would you like your supporters to react to this? Kind of a leading question, which Trump gets asked all the time. Usually those leading questions are on the inflammatory side. So I appreciate this leading question. Trump responded like that. I would like them to respond nonviolently. So, some mixed messages from him. They're gonna do something. Going after the left, cracking down on the left is definitely something that they promised to do from the beginning. So they're gonna use it as an excuse to do that. And definitely the possibility of roving gangs of people sympathetic to Charlie Kirk, white supremacists, Proud Boy types, all of that might stage their own type of brown shirt style attacks in the coming days, especially in connection with what the administration is doing. The only thing that comes to mind about that, and I could be wrong about this, but I have not seen as much on the streets activity from people like the Proud Boys, it seems, scarily, like a lot of them have been folded into the government at this point. So many of them are probably acting in roles for ICE and these other types of secret police factions that Donald Trump is trying to organize. So that means that those people will be activated as weapons of the state to go after people in any way that they can figure out how to target certain individuals, certain ideologies, and go after them. They're probably going to start testing the waters there, maybe in some cases going about it very aggressively. But also it could mean that there is less, like I said, brown shirt style on the outside violence that happens. If a lot of the actual organized violence has been folded into the government, that takes the punch out of the disorganized violence, which in these sort of chaotic fascist escalations, the on-the-ground violence tends to be one of the more escalating forces. So I'm not sure how that'll affect things, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll see lots of gang activity from people like the Proud Boys. Definitely there's a lot of people out there who are being ginned up against transgender people and left-wing people right now, and probably going to be trying to figure out ways to go after them. So now to get to Charlie Kirk. This will be the first podcast I've done since the Charlie Kirk shooting happened in Utah on September 10th. I did a live stream about it that night. Some of you guys might have tuned in for that. I imagine a lot of you didn't see it. Where I was just answering some questions about it, debating a couple people. My take on this is very simple. Charlie Kirk advocated for the conditions that led to his death. He very specifically, very openly advocated that certain deaths, violent death, senseless death, is worth it to preserve. It's a necessary consequence to preserve the Second Amendment. This is something he said more than once. I'm not saying that justifies his death, and I'm not saying you should say it justifies his death, but I do suggest that that is the narrative that we try to push as much as we can, because they are pushing their narrative aggressively, and that's ultimately what this comes down to, is it's a war for who's going to have the narrative. We know how their propaganda machines work, and like the governor from Utah said, all of the machines of disinformation are going full bore about this, and the forces that want America to delve into violence are definitely seizing on this moment, whether they be alt-right groypers or foreign adversaries or whatever. And I think the wrong approach here is to give in to this idea of lionization of Charlie Kirk as though he was some brave upholder of debate that, we all should aim to be more like, and we should not talk about the things that he actually advocated for, but we should celebrate the fact that he wanted to debate people and all of that. That was Ezra Klein's take in the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times. He wrote an opinion piece saying that he doesn't think it's right to focus on the things Charlie Kirk said while he was alive. He doesn't think it's right to try to make this a political issue, a politicized issue about Charlie Kirk, and rather tries to uphold this idea of American democracy and debate. Look, I agree with that. I think that's great. The problem is that there is one particular force in America that has done more to degrade that democratic process and system of values more than any other group of people in America, and that is exactly Charlie Kirk's camp of people. And yes, he did go and do these performative debates, and I think in terms of as a way of spreading your ideology, it's certainly effective. But how can we not analyze the ideology itself? It is not in service of saying, did this person deserve to die or not? Because I would agree that that's the wrong path to go down if we're talking about how to talk about this going forward. But the right way to talk about it is to recognize that Charlie Kirk specifically advocated for a less safe and more dangerous America. That was the consequences of what he advocated for. And so to push all of that aside, along with all of the other horrific things that he said, racist, misogynistic, terrible things that he said about all kinds of people. He said that his own daughter, 10 years old, if she was raped, he would make her deliver the child. That is the level of ideological entrenchment that Charlie Kirk built a career off of. And it would be very naive of us to just take this practice that he did of debate and say, well, this is obviously him upholding the American tradition of free exchange of ideas. We just saw on Mehdi Hasan's Jubilee debate that there was a young, gleeful fascist who was willing to go into that debate setting and said, we use these systems of democracy in order to take power, and then we take those systems of democracy away. And Charlie Kirk is not just an advocate for that, because that is currently what's happening. And even in Charlie Kirk's death, he is being used as a symbol to, in the words of people on the right themselves, turn into this Reichstag moment that they can effectively use to start killing anybody they want and trying to strip people's rights away. That's what Hitler did after the Reichstag fire, which was fake and blamed on the communists. He used that to suspend people's rights and begin the persecutions that happened in Nazi Germany. And as much as we want to talk about inflammatory rhetoric and not calling everybody we disagree with a Nazi, the reality is that the ideology that Charlie Kirk was constantly pushing is one that is aligned with this escalation of violence that is happening. And decades ago, we could have solved this problem of random gun violence being something that everybody has to be fearful of at all times. Charlie Kirk and other public figures like him, and politicians, especially powerful ones, are affected by this less than anybody else. Not that they have to fear it less than anybody else, especially now, but by and large, the people who get slaughtered in this country are school children and random innocents in public places when nobody's filming them and trying to create content off of this debate strategy so that we have this horrific video. Most of the murders that happen in this country that are just like this happen off camera. Many of them happen to children. It's happened so many times. Charlie Kirk has specifically said that we need to ignore violence and death like that in order to preserve the Second Amendment. And so this is the type of world that we live in now. And that's aside from all of the fear-mongering and the hateful rhetoric that they throw at anybody who is not white and anybody who is not aligned with the white Christian nationalist project. So I'm saying all of this not to inflame tensions and not to turn people into a bunch of red-in-the-face maniacs that are ready to go out and commit violence. I don't want anybody to do that. Anybody at all, anywhere across the political spectrum. But we got to be realistic about where we are at. And the person in the White House is by far the person who inflames the tensions of this country more than anybody else. And even himself, even his own commentators, his most loyal and most productive commentators that spread his message so effectively across college campuses are not safe from the America that Trump and the rest of the conservatives going back many decades have helped to create. So the last thing I'll mention about this, given that we don't know who did this yet, who knows? Maybe by the time you hear this, they'll know who did it. Maybe we will never know who did it. It's likely they'll find somebody, especially now that they've released images of him. It's going to be hard to just find some random person to frame, but they still could. So we don't know what's going to happen, but if you ask me, the person most likely to have committed this is similarly to the person who tried to shoot at Trump, somebody else who was on the right who hated Charlie Kirk for some reason. There are people on the right, like the Nick Fuentes neo-Nazi groypers, that for some reason hate Turning Point USA and reacted very gleefully to the fact that he was killed, both because they hated him and because they can use this as an opportunity to agitate for the race war that they want to happen. So the people on the right who have heard this story, which was widely circulated about how bullet engravings on the casings mean it's a transgender person, they're running with that. Many of them already believe it 100%, I'm sure, and have not seen the updated version. So maybe there will be updates in the case that cause people to change their mind, but especially if they don't find anybody, that narrative is going to keep running with people. Even after they identified the person who shot Trump in Pennsylvania, they still were running with the narrative that this was a trans person, even though after it was on the record that he was a Republican voter. He had always been a Republican going back years in high school. Everybody that knew him said he was a Trump supporter. They don't care about any of that, and they still use that as a touch point for their kind of conspiracies that the left is after all of them. Now, the thing about that is, my initial reaction here, because of this theory that I feel like it's more likely to be somebody on the right than anybody else, is that because of that fact, in the case of Trump's shooting, that narrative went away. And they weren't able to do much with it. They weren't able to use it as any type of Reichstag moment. Even after they got into office, you don't see Donald Trump fear-mongering about that event or trying to tie it to some larger conspiracy. They stopped talking about it. They may reference it here and there in order to lionize Trump, but they don't talk about it like some conspiracy against Trump, and that's because the narrative is too inconvenient. He's an inconvenient perpetrator of the crime. So the best thing that we can hope for in this case is that whoever did this is an inconvenient perpetrator of the crime for them, because if it complicates their narrative, that's going to make it harder for them to turn this into some giant witch hunt against the left, despite the fact that to some extent it's going to become that at some point anyway. But if this, God forbid, is some kind of person who fits their narrative in some way, or they're able to propagandize to that effect in the absence of any actual suspect, then it could get very violent, especially on the part of people acting outside of the administration. And then we know that the administration has signaled very clearly that if that happens, they're going to take it as an indication of escalating left-wing violence, and they're going to double, triple down. That's all Donald Trump does. That's all this project does, is they double down. They don't apologize. They don't back off of the things that they've said in the past in order to simmer the tensions down. They don't do any of that. They want us to do that because they want us to back down, and they double down, they escalate, they escalate. That's their project. So that's why I say focusing on the fact that Charlie Kirk and the conditions he advocated for are what created this problem and what led to his death is, in my opinion, the best narrative to run with, because it's not trying to make this case that he deserved to die because he was a Nazi fascist. We can believe that if we want to, but the point is that we have to recognize that this happened because of conditions that conservatives wanted. And if we don't want them to run with the narrative in a way that's going to allow them to kill whoever the fuck they want to kill, then we have to try to center the narrative on the fact that this was created by policy that conservatives and even Charlie Kirk himself supported.